I thought the post-match interviews were the most entertaining part of that to an extent, because they were good post-match interviews. I liked the way both managers agreed that I think Clach's goal in the game was definitely a goal, and on the other hand, Rothes' second goal probably should have definitely stood.
Probably should have definitely. Yeah, it should have stood. I mean, I thought it was an end. I mean, if you look over the 90 minutes, how Clach didn't score is beyond me with some of the chances that they had, and on another day they would take them. I think overall you'd be encouraged by the performance and the way they played and caused problems for Rothes. I did think set pieces, the only goal that stood obviously comes from a set piece, but I did think set pieces throughout, they looked a bit vulnerable from like Alan Pollock and Liam McDade that were taking corners and free kicks for Rothes. Their delivery was on the money, and with like Ben Johnson and Michael Finnis and boys like that in the box, they're dangerous, and that's obviously where the goals come from. The offside goal, I mean, the angle we obviously have isn't perfect, but I thought at the time he wasn't offside, and when you stop it, still don't think he's offside. Actually, almost looks like he's behind the player that plays the ball, so I think that should have stood. And then the Ben Johnson one, it's disallowed for the foul on the goalkeeper. I can't understand that at all. Like, he hasn't even. It's not like he like backs into James Kendall or like moves to barge him or anything. He just gets in front and nods the ball into the net. I mean, both of them for me should have stood and should have had a 2-1. But and over a piece, decent game over the 90 minutes. I thought Rothes obviously had to maybe dig in a bit more second half, especially. But I think both sides, although the Speyside got the points, both sides would be reasonably encouraged.
Now, after the game, you also asked Ross Jack. Well, he said he was aiming higher up the table, and you obviously asked him how high he was aiming, and he was very diplomatic in his approach at that point. But how high do you think Rothes can realistically be targeting this season?
I think if they could get in to the top 6, that would be pretty good going. I mean, right now they're 9th, but I know, and everyone's sort of played a different number of games, but right now they're 9th, but they're only 3 points behind 3rd, so that sort of shows you the nature of the table. But I think they have got more depth probably to their squad this season than they have had in previous, and I think a realistic aim for them would be trying to be pushing or breaking into that top 6, which is obviously easier said than done, but I think that's round about where they should be looking.
Alright, well, as I said earlier, 3 highlights games, so let's quickly move on to the second one, Nairn County against Turriff United from Station Park. Okay, no points then for either of our league debutant managers at the weekend. New Clachnacuddin boss, Conor Gethins, not picking up any points against Rothes, and it was the same for Warren Cummings there. Turriff United going down 2-1 away at Nairn. First things first, apologies about the quality of the video in this game. What a pea super it was. Do you think, I would say it was one of those games where it could have feasibly ended in a draw, you don't think?
I don't know. I think David Day had such a good afternoon for Turriff that he kind of kept his side in it. And yeah, I mean, Turriff pull a goal back and there's a bit of a late push, but Nairn were worthy winners for me.
I thought it was a wee bit of the game of two halves. Like, I would agree that certainly on chances we've seen in that, Nairn probably were in the ascendancy a wee bit more, but then it's one of them at 2-0 when the Turriff got the next goal. Obviously, second half and especially sort of in the closing stages, they're the team that's sort of putting on the pressure and could have taken something out of the game. But I think if you're Turriff, I mean, both the goals that Warren Cummings said afterwards, both the goals they lost, he was disappointed with. And I mean, even like the second one, you know, it breaks a couple of times and there's nobody really, following in and things like that. There's just a few things there that they'd want to tidy up on. But I think he's, again, it's probably positives and negatives for them in terms of, like, there are some of their attacking play is good, and I mean they've shown this season they can score goals, and then Davy Day, they've got a top-class keeper as well, but there's a few defensive things they could probably be looking to work on. And then the other side of it, I mean, Nairn, sort of just everything seems to be going for them and ticking along quite nicely just now. 5 wins in all competitions on the bounce, and obviously the kind of perfect preparation before North of Scotland Cup final coming up this weekend.
I think with Nairn, I think the last 2 times I've read post-match reaction from Steve Mackay and then the assistant at the weekend, you get a sense that they still think Nairn can be a lot better in games, but they're winning games, which I suppose is a good place to be in.
I think if you looked at them, and I don't mean this to sound a bit harsh in a way, but if they were looking at their season overall so far, there's probably not a massive number of games where they'd come out and go, we've been the finished article and played, to the absolute peak of what we can be. But at the start of the season, if they maybe weren't quite at their best, they seemed to be getting edged out in a lot of those games and losing by the odd goal, whereas now, like last week against Wick was another one where they didn't feel they'd played particularly well, but they're staying in games, they're taking their chances when they come along and getting the job done, picking up wins, which is what it's all about. I mean, and going back to Saturday, they feel they can maybe play better, but with the amount of chances they created, I would say that was one of their better performances, I think, this season.
It's interesting, because I think if the season ended now, you'd say it's been a decent campaign for Nairn County. They're going well in the league, they've got a cup final. It's been a very good campaign, but if they think they can go higher, then good luck to them. And I think the head-to-head matches against the teams above them are going to be crucial in determining whether they can push higher.
I mean, that's probably the thing for whether it's Nairn, Rothes, Huntly, who will come on to as well, Turriff as well, for those 4. It's probably those games against the sort of established top 6 in most people's minds, if you will, which is Brechin, Buckie, Brora for Martin, Fraserburgh, Banks of Dee. So if you can be reasonably consistent the rest of the time, and what you get out of those games is probably going to define how close you get to that sort of top 6, or if you get in it or whatever. But those, for these teams, those games will be quite important.
All right. Well, the reason that we managed to film 3 games over the weekend wasn't increased manpower. It was just one of the games took place on Friday night, which allowed us to get there. Baxley against Fraserburgh was at Spain Park, and here's the best of the action from that one. Okay, if you think the sofas have moved since the last panel, that's just a figment of your imagination. They haven't. I thought Banks of Dee were clearly the better team in that game. 2 good finishes from Hamish McLeod and Michael Phillipson. Second one especially for me. Rotten penalty from Deshaun Golden though, wasn't it?
It is, but I think for me, there's a little bit of justice is done. I don't think it's a penalty in the first place, to be honest.
I think with that, specifically with that penalty, obviously I did have a brief word with Deshaun afterwards, and he said he didn't want to speak about it, and I can see why. I think with the penalty, Joe Barber also said as well that he shouldn't have spilled it, and he's quite right. I think the shot was actually dribbling wide as well, so he probably could have let it go. But if you see it, and we've seen the slow motion, he spilled it, but then his hands are like that on top of the ball, and Lachie McLeod just comes in, toes the ball, and then good striker play, sort of gets the touch on the ball, goes down, and obviously the referees thought, and the linesmen have gone, that's a penalty. So probably right outcome that it didn't go in the end. But I think in terms of the game overall, Fraserburgh, from their point of view, they lost 2 really poor goals early on, and then Banks of Dee took them really well. The first one, Kane went and driving, they picked up a loose ball, and then Kane went and drove forward to the edge of the box, picked out a correct pass, and it's a good finish. Second one, I think, irked Mark Cowie even more potentially, because the way he'd set up midfield, he was like Mark Gilmore, it seemed to be pretty easy for him to just sort of saunter down the right flank and then pass it inside. And the way the Broch were set up, I think, was to try and counter sort of the surging runs that the likes of Mark Gilmore and Kane Winton make, and clearly they didn't do it there, so that irked them. And then after that, I thought like second half, as you saw, there wasn't just an abundance of highlights, and the Broch did have a fair bit of the ball and fair bit of sort of the game was played in Banks of Dee's half, but there was never really a lot of gilt-edged chances or anything like that, and it was sort of pressure, but it never really felt like a goal was coming, to be honest with you. I mean, like Daniel Hoban and the Banks of Dee goal, other than that, like that save where he sort of came out early on to deny Ryan Sargent, didn't really have a huge amount to do, and I think, like Mark was saying afterwards as well, like he felt Fraserburgh lost the physical battle, and they were also sort of outworked, which is two things that you wouldn't normally associate with Fraserburgh, and two things that were disappointed him particularly. But on the other side of it, for Banks of Dee, I mean, it's another excellent home performance, keeps him nicely in the mix at the top end of the table. Clean sheet, I mean, we saw they were excellent when they beat Bucky at Spain Park, clean sheet 2-0. They should have drawn with Breedon there, and now they've beaten Fraserburgh, so really just confirming what everyone already knew anyway, that they're a match for anyone on their day when they play like that.
Okay, there were 4 other games in the Breedon Highland League over the weekend. The rest all took place on Saturday. That was the only Friday night game that we've just discussed. I think we'll start with Huntly 0 for Martin 1. This was a top of the table clash. This one, it sounded like very fine margins. Had Huntly taken one of their early chances, things potentially go in their favour. In the end, Julian Wade, a name we hear very often on this show, his goal was the difference. That's what he's proven himself to be, isn't it? A difference maker?
Yeah, he is. And going back to the theme we were discussing before the highlights, this is a game that sums up what Callum's touching on. Of it's how can these like a Huntly get on against the established 6, if you like. And in a game of fine margins, they've come really short, very unlucky. But for Martin, they take the points and they move on. Huntly still have a little bit to go for me, although they're up there. But they need to be picking up points like they did against Fraserburgh when they play teams like Formartine, especially at Christie Park.
I think. So I mean, Alan Hale sort of said afterwards that he felt on like balance of play with the way this sort of second half went as well. He couldn't really have any complaints. But I think from what I've read and heard, on another day, you know, I don't think if you were a Huntly supporter, I don't think you could be too downbeat really, because on another day I think hitting the woodwork and that, you could have easily taken something out of the game. I would say losing another goal for a corner kick for set piece is perhaps a slight area that they could improve on our weeks. But I mean, we saw last week in the Scottish Cup that obviously cost them, and it's been the difference between the sides on Saturday. As a slight aside as well, I think that some of the home supporters seemed pretty irate. I've heard about a penalty shout in the first half which Dan McFarlane didn't give for, well, he'll have the reasons and he's not here to explain, but I'd heard there was quite a bit of disappointment with that one.
Huntly, I suppose, when you look at the fixtures, they've got the Shield semi. It's a semi, isn't it, against Banks of Dee in midweek. That's another big sort of test of their mettle against one of the sort of the sides that will be definitely wanting to win the title this season.
It is, but I mean, again, there's no reason why they can't get a result in that game. I think it'll be a close semi-final, and if both teams play to the standards are capable of, it should be a really good tie. I mean, the 30s on about the Fraserburgh game, Ken. There's a Breedon game, the win. I mean, I know it wasn't against a side at the top of the table, but the way they played to beat Clach, which we had in the cameras, like Huntly have proven this season that they're a very good side, and I think it's one of them where you would expect, I would expect on Wednesday it'll be end-to-end stuff and both teams sort of going at it, and probably plenty of goals, I would predict.
Okay, Brora Rangers 3, Forest Mechanics 2. Interesting one, this one. Adam McKinnon, Jordan McRae and Mark Sheehan had Brora 3-0 up. Lost a goal before half-time to Forest's Craig McKenzie. Miller Gamble then got sent off early in the second half, and it seemed like it almost became a nervier finish than it perhaps might have been when Taylor Thane made it 3-2. And I think that when you read the post-match reaction, it was quite interesting because almost both managers had reasons to sort of be proud of their sides, because Brora, they've shown the steel to hold on, but Forrest have shown the steel to kind of get themselves back in the contest.
I can understand that, because with Forrest especially, when you find yourself 3-0 down to Brora in the first half, we've seen with plenty of good teams that can end up being a bit of a do-in, frankly. And I imagine, maybe we wouldn't say this publicly, but Stephen McDonald might have been, because Forrest haven't just been in the best of runs of forms either. Stephen McDonald might have been feeling that a wee bit standing at the side at 3-0, but his side have shown that good bit of spirit and come back. And obviously once it's gone down to 10 men and they get 3-2, I'd imagine the last 5-10 minutes it would have been probably bulk of the play would have been Can's pressure and trying to get that equaliser. But I mean, as Ali McDonald said as well, that Brora managed to see it out, he's pleased with, and it's another good 3 points on the board. And you were on about P Supers earlier. I saw a picture for that game at Dudgeon Park. It was that was 5 goals. I don't know how many were actually
visible.
That was
wasn't even Miller Gamble, it was sent off.
Didn't touch him, ref.
Wick Academy 2, Inverurie Locos 1. This was also up north. I don't know how foggy this one was. No pictures, I don't know. I haven't seen any. Thomas Reid cancelled out Jack Halliday's first half opener.
It was Mark McGregor's first half opener.
Thomas Reid cancelled out Mark McGregor's first half opener pretty late on. Locos then got a pen and it looked like it was slipping away from Wick, but Graham Williamson saved it. And then what had looked like potentially being a Wick loss turns into a Wick win when Robert McLean then nets. It was pretty steely from Wick.
Yeah, it's quite a crazy sort of last 10, 15 minutes. I mean, first of all, Wick, Gary Manson was sort of set up to basically let Inverurie, I think, have quite a lot of the ball but not give away chances and try and counter. Seemed to be doing that successfully, got themselves in front, and then he was really unhappy, lost a goal for a free kick, just spare man at the back post. And then and then the last fight, I mean, the penalty was, I mean, the referee Owen Lawrence he felt he saw a sharp pull, gave the penalty, which was within his right to do, but neither manager must have been quite a sort of stramash at the corner, because neither manager afterwards had seen what the penalty was for, but just said, "Oh, he gave it." So, so there we go. And Graham Williamson's obviously made a good save. I think probably for Locos, just sums up their season almost in a way. I mean, Miles Gaffney, I'm sure he'll be disappointed that he wasn't able to convert, but it's just that fine line again. Could have, I mean, if they score the penalty, chances are they probably win. And then, obviously, it doesn't go in, and you think, well, still coming away with a point, and then they concede a goal for a corner in the last minute. So, probably just sums up symptomatic of the way this season's gone for Inverurie so far. Although Dean Donaldson was reasonably optimistic with the way they'd played, but felt that just in the final third lacked a wee bit of creativity and that sort of killer instinct. For Wick, the other side of it, I mean, there's, I think up and down would be fair to describe them this season. Like, they've played well in games, Saturday being one, and win they had against Forest in midweek, they were really good, but then obviously we saw them on the cameras against Lossy, and Gary described them as rotten and kind of hit and miss, but they were obviously hit on Saturday and a good result for them. And it seemed like the crowd were certainly getting involved at Harmsworth Park, because again, Gary said afterwards it was the loudest roar he'd heard there for a long time, and I mean, he's been there for 20 plus years, so it must have been quite something at the end.
Okay, one more game to discuss. Devon Vale 0, Brecon City 4. Turns out this was Andy Kirk's last game in charge of the champions. He has left to be Craig Levine, who was also at Brecon in a sort of advisory role. He's left to be Craig Levine's assistant at Premiership St Johnstone. In that final game, goals from Fraser McLeod, 2 from Grady McGrath and 1 from Ewan Spark were the difference for Brecon. Sounded like McGrath's second was pretty decent in this one, but I think we'll have to...
It was his first one, I think. Was
it his first
one that was decent?
Okay.
It was described as a goal of the season contender.
But I suppose we need to start with Andy Kirk's departure.
I understand why Andy's gone, because it's a chance to work in the Premiership, and he's a coach first and foremost. It's a sore one for Breedon because they're really well placed in terms of the Highland League defence. They're second in table, they've got games in hand, undefeated in the league, so everything's looking good there. From their point of view, I saw they didn't mess about. They've already got the advert out for a replacement. I'm sure they'll be looking to get a new manager in place quickly. I'm interested to see who that ends up being, because to me, as we all know, their aspirations have been back in the SPFL as quickly as possible. I would imagine it's probably someone with that sort of experience or calibre they'll be looking at.
They're also sort of on, obviously, geographically, in Highland League terms, you know, if like one of the teams in Aberdeenshire gets rid of their manager, we're already like, well, will it be this person?
X,
will it
Y,
be this
Z.
person?
The usual suspects.
Yeah, but like with Breedon, it's slightly different. You're like, it could be anyone, or it could be somebody, you know, on the playing staff, one of the older players, or sometimes you just don't know.
Well, this is the thing a wee bit, it's like in terms of that geographical element, because they're sort of Dundee, Perth, Edinburgh, Glasgow, even's also open to them, because I mean Andy was based in Edinburgh, so it's like obviously away games you've that bit more travelling, but I think for, you know, home games at Glebe Park and the training side of things, training in Dundee, it's not really seen as, you know, much of a problem for folk in the Central Belt. I mean, I think you can totally understand why they've moved on. I mean, Craig Levine, in this sort of advisory capacity that he's been doing, I think certainly the impression I've had when you've seen him at games and chatting to him a wee bit is that the involvement he's had's maybe sort of reignited his love of the game a wee bit. I think that's potentially fair to say, because the way it sort of ended for him at Hearts the last time he was in management, you know, probably obviously wasn't how he would have wanted it to go, but he seems to really have enjoyed his time, and I can understand why he's gone. And then for Andy, I mean, there's not many people make the sort of jump for go Highland League to Premiership, and it's obviously back in full-time football, which is what they want to be involved in, so you can understand why they've done it. I think the only tinge of regret they might have is they obviously went into Breedon hoping to take them back to the Premiership, the Scottish League. That would have been quite a jump, back into the SPFL, and they haven't obviously managed to do that, so that's probably the only disappointment they would have. But for whoever comes in, good squad of players there, as you said, 30 well positioned, so should be able to, you'd hope, keep on motoring in the same way that they have done.
Now, only because I've seen a couple of Breedon fans mentioning this, Grady McGrath, right, Breedon's star player, standout, is there potential that he maybe gets a chance from Andy Kirk, Craig Levine,
at St Johnstone
to step up?
It's a big jump. I mean, think about Max Kucheravi. I mean, he did brilliantly in his time at Breedon, but it's only now that he's sort of gotten into the first team picture really at St Johnstone.
He's gone via Kelty and Falkirk as well. Like, I don't think, personally I would be surprised. Like, I could see Grady potentially going up a couple of levels, but I don't think right now, I don't think they would potentially go all the way up to Premiership
Fifth
level.
tier to top tier is a big jump.
It is, there's no question about that. But going back to the game on Saturday as well, I think obviously 4-0 looks reasonably comfortable for Breedon, and I mean Craig Stewart had no qualms about the outcome, but again from Devon Vale's point of view, he felt like 3 of the 4 goals they've lost are pretty slack, and that's just, you've seen it in other games last week in the Scottish Cup as well. Like Devon Vale, when they're not, you know, scoring loads of goals, you need to be a wee bit tighter at the back.
Okay, well, after the weekend's games, let's have a look at the updated Breedon Highland League standings.